it was more or less a religion in those days. There was no doubt about that.
They came through and won it, and I cried my eyes out. I've done it, I've done it. I went up to my father's photo and I said to him, thank you for taking me to football, Dad. I've had some lovely years.
We scattered them all round the penalty spot and all round the goal post. And hopefully you're not going to let any goals in.
Kicking and Screaming tells the story of the players, from serfs to superstars.
We had no say. We were more or less like slaves in those days.
It was showbiz. To come down and go in nightclubs and see all these stunning, beautiful women. And it was very difficult to say no to it, which is why I got in a lot of trouble.
It tells the story of a beautiful game.
Lord Georgie Best was a phenomenon. Like watching any true artist, Marcel Marceau, watching somebody who, how did Marcel Marceau walk that way? Before him, Stanley Matthews had that.
And a game that's always had its ugly side, on and off the pitch.
You were there to enjoy the game, enjoy yourself. You were there to get results and to win games. Like if you kicked me, I wouldn't kick you back. Everybody else would kick you.
Yeah, Luxembourg was a good one. Tipping cars over, smashing windows. We all went to jail for it. But I don't regret it. I won't regret it, no.
And of course, it tells the story of our national triumphs and failures.
4 minutes later, Seabour passes to Pushkash. Another touch of Magyar magic, and that's number 3.
Hungary gave us a lesson. We thought we were masters of the world before that match.
It was football's greatest moment, and probably sport's greatest moment.
This is the story of how one medieval pastime became Britain's national sport. Several centuries ago, football looked something like this. Rival villages fought it out on religious festival. The Dooneys, those born downtown, and the Uppies have been doing battle in the streets of Kirkwall for over 200 years.
Can you lift that air? What's that?
Like other games of its kind, mass football had no rules. It was a primeval maelstrom in which the ball could be kicked, handled and thrown. There was no fixed route or duration. To win, the Uppies must reach the town gates, the Doonies the hub.
Well, I personally say it's a disease. It's a disease which I've had for 30 years and which a lot of the chaps in here have had for similar time.
Come on, Uppie boys! You have his pile on them!
It's very difficult to describe. Uppies hate Doonies and Doonies hate Uppies on Christmas and New Year's Day. Some of my best friends are Doonies, but not on that day.
It's very hard to go down and watch it and become involved. But at the same time, common sense rules that you get to a certain age where the body's not quite fit to take the punishment.
I mean, the last 15-20 minutes of the game's been very, very rough, very violent. Just, I mean, for the Uppies to come down here so quickly, it's a bit of a slap in the face for them.
So far, really, the Doonies have mainly been able to keep a hold of the ball.
And you said you weren't going to get involved.
No, I know, but I mean, I could watch a ball going up. I can watch a ball going up. I can't watch a ball going down.
After 7 hours of battle, the ball surfaces by the Uppie goal. In pre-industrial Britain, mass football could be deadly. In one game in East Anglia, 9 men lost their lives. Eventually, the authorities everywhere banned it, and the game came to an abrupt halt. But it got a new lease of life from an unexpected quarter. Early in the 19th century, the game was taken up in public schools, like Eton and Rugby. Some of the boys may have seen the game played in their villages.
The whole football ethos is very deep in our soul. Because if you were lucky enough to be in certain houses where the architecture was suitable, we had a very skilled and violent game called passage football.
Yes.
And this was accepted by the house tutors. That in these particular houses, it was legitimate for the boys to get up this game. And it was really a kind of primitive form of war game. I mean, if you could get hold of a door handle...
Passage was only about as wide as that.
You could get hold of a door handle and you've got the ball between your feet. You took a lot of shifting.
A lot of shifting, yes.
Though banned in public, in schools like Charterhouse it was allowed to flourish, provided rules were introduced.
It teaches you what the Victorians would have called manliness. It teaches you to obey rules of conduct, even when you're in conflict, which is very important.
The first rules dealt with the shape of the goals and the size of pitches and teams. Every school had its own version of the game, though none that would be recognizable today. The field game is still played today at Eton.
My grandfather played in a position called short behind, and my father did the same for the school. They were both very good at it. It's halfway between rugby and soccer. You don't handle the ball at the Eton field game, but you do score something which is rather equivalent to a try. It's called a rouge in Eton language. On the other hand, passing, as it is fundamental to both rugby and soccer in different ways, is virtually forbidden in Eton football. If you pass forwards, it's called sneaking, and if it's passed sideways, it's called cornering.
You had to have ball control, you had to dribble, you had to be able to move, to swerve. And I think there was a great pride, a sense of pride in the house. You may say that's funny these days, but in fact, it was a sort of team spirit.
Many congratulations. Thanks very much. Well done.
In the 1840s and 50s, the old boys took football into the universities, the armed services, and the cricket clubs. In 1863, they formed a football association. Old Carthusians, the old boys from Charterhouse, was one of the first winners of the FA Cup. And it was an old Carthusian who coined the word soccer.
Soccer is an abbreviation of association as distinct from rugby union football, and it's attributed to Charles Reefer Brown, who was a very distinguished old Carthusian footballer. One morning he came down for breakfast. He was asked whether he was going to be in hall that morning. He said, well, I'm coming in for breakfast, and then I'm going to play soccer, and I'm not going to play rugby.
The creme de la creme were the Corinthians. They epitomised the amateur ethos.
They chose the name Corinthians because it's consistent with St. Paul's letter to the Corinthians that not everybody can win, but those who win should do so according to the rules and the spirit of the time.
The original Corinthians, men like Cunliffe Gosling and W.J. Oakley, were drawn from the elite of Victorian society.
Well, very old family, banking family. We lived in Essex for 300 years. Well, I was going to say they're fine, upright country gentlemen. That sounds a very snobbish sort of thing to say, but I think people were in those days.
I always reckoned in my young days that Cunliffe Gosling was ever the richest man to play football for England. Not today, I don't say today, because they're going silly mad, and that's the trouble with sport, I think, but that's what, and he didn't mind a tackle, and he didn't mind giving one.
Oh, time, King!
And they would never argue with the ref. And that they certainly, if anyone scored, the others didn't rush at him and hug him, and that would have appalled them, wouldn't it? Absolutely appalled them.
And he played for fun. He didn't play because he was paid for. It's a professional thing. I mean, obviously it was an honour to play for England, no doubt about that, and he realised it. But it was just another game. When he looked at his diary, he saw what day's hunting he had, and he said, oh, well, next week we'll have a football match. We'll do that, and then we'll have 2 days shooting and so on. And he fitted it in to the sort of life he was leading.
It was the amateurs who sowed the seeds of their own decline when they planted football clubs outside genteel southern society. The first such club in Scotland was Queen's Park.
At that time, the driving force in England was very definitely the public schools. That wasn't the background in Scotland at all. It was much more a lower middle class thing, people who were clerks, people who were students, that kind of thing.
Queen's Park is still an amateur side today. Though languishing in the Scottish Third Division, they continue to play in Scotland's national stadium. But in their heyday, they had a great reputation for inventive play.
There seems very little doubt that the Scots pioneered the passing game and were very good at it. The English game was a much more individual game, and dribbling was a skill that was highly prized. The Scottish game was a much more cooperative game, which seems strange since we're not a particularly cooperative people. But we did, I think, esteem very highly the art of combination.
The Scots had a whole bag of tricks, including chipping the ball and heading it.
It must have been more effective because the really heavy defeats of England tend to come in the first 10 to 15 years after the fixture started.
The Scottish onslaught was only a foretaste of things to come for the southern amateurs. A greater danger loomed in the industrial heartlands of northwest England. This is one of the oldest football pitches still in use in the world. It's where Turton Football Club, one of the first working class teams in Lancashire, began playing in 1872.
Don't dive in, Jake.
Harry Hardman and Cliff Leeming played for Turton 60 years ago.
My dad played here in the 1880s. He signed for Turton Reserves at 16-year-old, part-time, working in the mill for 3 and 6pence a week.
In the 1880s, 90s, there would be 2,000 or 3,000 on here. And then when we were playing, there was 200 or 300, or maybe 500.
Everybody stripped in the Chetham Arms. They all went up the steps at the side there, and it's been the same from the 1880s right on to 1939.
They had a big sack with all the boots in. They lifted the sack up and put all the boots on the floor. You were lucky if you played in the same pair 2 weeks together. Mr. Smith, the trainer, who we had to call Mr. Smith in those days, you know, you had to be a bit polite with the trainer. He'd been an ex-pro. And one day I put these boots on, you know. I said, there seems to be a nail in this right boot, Mr. Smith. He says, well, stamp your bloody foot and turn it over.
The working class were introduced to the game through the churches and schools, by old public school vicars and philanthropists like Quintin Hogg.
My grandfather thought that the human being ought to be balanced as between the spiritual and the physical. The Greeks invented sport, and it was always related to religion. And there's always been a relationship in civilized people's minds between a balanced development of mind, spirit, and body. And this was the idea my grandfather had. In his case, it was Christianity, because people no longer worshipped Zeus.
Aston Villa began here at Villa Cross in Birmingham. Wolves, Everton, and Bolton also started life as church teams. These teams were no match for the Southerners until they started buying in talent from Scotland.
You used to get adverts in the Glasgow newspapers for Scotch professors of the passing game to go down and show them how it was done. And there was a great deal of tapping of players in Scotland by what were called agents, or what Scottish sport called spies. And there's one famous instance when a party was dispatched, I think from Nottingham Forest to Kilmarnock, to look at a player who was called Bummer Campbell. And the citizens of Kilmarnock got wind of this, and when the agent arrived at the station, they met the train, and they set upon him and they rearranged him a bit, and they put him in the next train out of Kilmarnock.
My grandfather, John Inglis, He first played for Glasgow Rangers football, and I think it was due to a talent scout coming up from England that got him transferred to Blackburn Rovers. And of course, the wages up in Scotland then, particularly in the Clyde area where he lived, weren't very good. So he came down to Blackburn Rovers because the pay was better at football than it was in Scotland.
The Scottish professionals turned Lancashire into a hotbed of football. In 1883, Blackburn Olympic reached the final of the FA Cup against Old Etonians.
That's a good shot.
It was here at the Oval Cricket Ground that the Cup final was played. The year after, Australia beat England for the first time to establish the Ashes, where all the Cup finals and all the England internationals against Scotland were played. It was, in fact, the Wembley Stadium of the particular period.
Blackburn Olympic were eventually eclipsed by neighbours Rovers, but the team, comprising assorted mill workers, plumbers and clerks, ushered in a new era.
About 1,000 people had travelled down from Blackburn, doing, I'm afraid, what seems to have been reproduced in our own period, smashing up the refreshment bars at the railway stations on the way. And they regarded them as almost aliens from another planet in southern England because of the dialogue and the robustness which those of us in southern England must welcome, even if we don't always understand the diphthongs.
The Northerners were outnumbered by thousands of Southerners who converged on the Oval in South London to cheer the Old Etonians. But unlike their gentleman opponents, Blackburn Olympics preparations were scientifically planned.
They went off to a health hydro for a week before the Cup final, and their training diet on that occasion had a special structure. 6 o'clock in the morning, glass of port wine and 2 raw eggs, followed by a walk along the sands. Then later, breakfast, which was porridge and haddock. For lunch, what they call dinner, 2 legs of mutton, 1 for each end of the table. And then tea, more porridge and a pint of milk each. And then topped it all up, supper, 6 oysters each.
12,000 spectators watched the match of the century. It ended in a 1-all draw and had to go into extra time. But with Old Etonians down to 10 men and no substitutes allowed, the fitter team from the north scored to win the cup.
It was the first time that the public school amateur stranglehold on the FA Cups had been broken. And when the captain, Warburton, went to get the cup from the president of the FA, he said, it's like a little tea kettle, he'll never come back to London.
The cup stayed north, Blackburn Rovers winning it 5 times in the next 8 years. The Victory Parade soon became one of football's ritual events, rekindling a sense of pride and belonging for many people absent since the days of village life. The success of the Lancashire professionals transformed football's prospects. Hundreds of thousands began to watch football every week. The first motion cameras came too, curious to record a new kind of mass entertainment taking root. This is the oldest footage of a football match in the world, featuring 2 of the great sides of the 1890s. That same year, Zilwood March kicked his first ball as football fever spread to the schools and to the streets.
We had a very good team in the school. The master encouraged it. We got to the stage when they wouldn't play us. Nobody would play us. We was about 21-0 or something, 21-0, just some ridiculous scores.
We was football mad those days, you know, but we had nothing else to do with it. One occasion, a policeman come through and he grabbed the nearest boy to him and he took him away. And I'm not kidding you, he did take him away. What happened? The sequel was this, that his father was fined £half a crown for allowing his boy to play football in the street. Now that's your good old days, isn't it?
London too was gripped by cup fever, thanks to Spurs, who became the first southern professional club to win the FA Cup.
Invariably, we always had a photograph taken on the railway lines in the front of the train. And when we got off that train, we could have blown the roof off that train with our shouting, our hollering and our bells and our rattles. Even my umbrella used to be snatched out of my hand and somebody danced up and down with it. It was great excitement.
A lot of people used to come to Preston. 20 to 40,000 on the North End was a normal day, normal football day. And you couldn't move. The women never used to go out on the Saturday when the North End were playing at home because they couldn't move in the town for men. Man, it was a good idea to collect one at that time, you know.
Well, when you're waiting for the game to start, you start these songs, you know. As soon as the ball was centred and the referee's whistle blew, the Hammers got up their temper and away with the ball they flew. Skinner passed to Wyatt, and Wyatt didn't know what to do, so he pushed it through to Ruffle, and Ruffle shot it through. Goal!
Football was also the field of dreams for every aspiring local businessman.
It was grandfather and great-uncle Henry Augustus. They actually bought the land where Stamford Bridge is now for a very small amount. Both of them were into steamers on the river, which brought an awful lot of money. So they wanted to have time to enjoy it, and I think what more could you enjoy better than a football club of your own? And I think a lot of people wanted to do that. They want to be connected with a football club, which gives them a certain amount of ego, if you like, for want of a better word, in the community.
Being a director also had its perks. For those of Preston North End and Liverpool, their joint annual outing became a feast of excess, as this early home movie records. Football's appeal soon spilled over into Europe. In 1908, the yachtsman and millionaire tea baron Sir Thomas Lipton proposed an international football tournament. He donated a magnificent silver trophy and invited the Italians, the Swiss, the Germans and the English to send in their best teams. This first World Cup would be held in Italy. But the Football Association refused to let any of their professional clubs attend. England's representative became the West Auckland Working Men's Club.
According to my dad, he had some either relations or friends at West Auckland. I mean, the FA was the top dogs then in the world, weren't they? That's why they refused to send the side out. They couldn't lower themselves to send the FA team or international side to play in Italy that didn't even know the fundamentals of football. Funniest part about it, they went through Cook's tours. And when they got to Milan, Cooks had forgot to book them in a hotel. So they slept on Milan Cathedral steps all night, and they had a game to play next day.
They were all, he said, the biggest reception ever they'd known, because they thought the Woolwich Arsenal, see, with them called WA, it was up in big print. And my brother said it was surprising when he was trying to make them believe they were just a local team, West Auckland, and they wouldn't have it, see. And they beat them the first time. And Juventus wasn't satisfied. It says they wanted to replay, because they didn't want to part with the cup. And they beat them again because my brother scored the winning goal. Because that goal was, I heard about that goal till I was tired.
When they came from Italy, they had to go to Garner North Station to get back home. And they all got on the train, but somebody left the trophy on the seat. Now, as the train going along, somebody said, "Oh, where's the trophy gone?" And this particular man said, "Oh, I've left it on the seat." And the porter found it, a French porter, and looked at it. It was in a box, black box. And he sent it on. It was sent on by French Railways, and they got it home safe. Or they could have lost that. But you know what these stations are now. All these thieves and vagabonds in Paris now.
The Football Association could not bring itself to acknowledge Britain's first international honours. But the people's game was becoming all-pervasive. In that other new mass entertainment, the cinema, football could be relied on to provide the melodrama. Broke out in 1914, the football clubs refused to suspend the league programme, to the government's consternation. But it was soon placated by the club's offer to turn football matches into mass recruitment stations.
Everybody was going up at that time because I was still playing football, you see, at Brighton. And when it came round to everybody going, I was of age to go. So I went. The country needs you.
It was only after the war that the Football Association finally recognised football's appeal and decided to build an arena fit for a national occasion. In 1922, work began on a hill in Wembley, North London, on the Empire Stadium. It was ready for the 1923 Cup final between Bolton and West Ham.
Wembley had been boosted up to be the finest ground in the world and all this sort of thing. And it was the first time that it had been played on. So, I mean, everything pointed out to the fact that there'd be a record crowd.
I was staying with a friend at Woking, and she'd been our home help. And she married, and we used to go and visit her. And she knew I was keen on football, and she suggested we went up to Wembley. And she knew London very well and went on the tubes. I wouldn't like to go on the tubes now. It excited us, not the men when we were older, that we were 19 then.
It was just a mass of people. And I always remember my father told me that when you get in the crowd, to keep your hands at the side so that you can protect your ribs, and always walk on your toes, otherwise you lose a shoe sometime.
And then the next minute we heard they were rushing the gates, but I think it was a wall they climbed. I don't think it was gates. And the people behind us said, "Get in front of that barrier. If you don't, you'll be crushed."
The place looked as though there'd been a battlefield or something. Turnstiles were smashed. We saw people being rolled down over the heads of the crowd. Youngsters mostly, I presume they were. And they get rolled in over it and put in over the barrier at the bottom of the terraces.
When I looked about, 10 minutes before kick-off, you couldn't see a blade of grass. It was just nothing, only heads, people. The choir at St. Luke's, to more or less pass the time on, they were singing "Abide With Me." And from that moment onwards, it's always been every cup final. It's a part of the tradition now.
The king, he got there just before the kick-off time, as usual. And I think his presence helped. People thought, well, here's the head of the country here. We must do something.
And the next thing was the policeman came on his white horse, Charger. He charged the crowd, and I shall never, never forget that. It was a wonderful experience.
But for PC George Scory on his horse Billy, the cup final was the last thing on his mind that day.
George told me that it was quite comical, really, because I wasn't even supposed to have been there. Not supposed to have been at the cup final? No, he said. I was walking round the West End on Billy and decided to pop into Rochester Road Police Station for a cup of tea, and this inspector came out and he said, Scory, got a job for you. Get up to Wembley. There's thousands of people up there watching a football game and they're becoming ugly. Get up there and sort them out. George said, where's Wembley? I don't even know how to get there. So he said, well, straight up the Edgware Road for about 4 miles and turn left. Now, get on. He said, well, Billy won't make it. Get on, get up there. And he went into the ground and started telling the people to move. Get over there, mate. Get back and get back, get back. And he gradually drifted the crowds back.
The police forced a passage through. And I think everybody was really relieved that they were playing at all, you know.
We was nicely entrenched around the touchline, and I saw the wingman dashing down the wing. All of a sudden there's a foot stuck out. He goes headlong, you see. God knows how many other occasions going round that touchline it happened. But I thought to myself, what a farce. What a farce for a cup final. But they carried through with it.
I mean, people were stamping their feet and shouting all the time, and it was just one continuous roar, really. And then when Jack scored, it was a sort of dream come true, because every team wants to win the cup.